I'd like to call this Development Committee meeting to order. Stand for the pledge. Chris, you got us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call order, Jess?
Lee,
Here.
Walter.
Here.
Gaylor.
Here. Guess I got those backwards. All right. We will, we've got two main things on the agenda tonight, and then we'll open it up for any further discussion if needed. Welcome to Development Committee, Brandon.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. So we're gonna start with the Fair Lady plan discussion. If any of the two of you, since you're on the agenda, would like to comment, we may call you up, we may not, but you're on the agenda. You don't have to come up now, but if, yeah. Yeah, since you're on the agenda, you guys, same with you, Mr. Platt, when your time comes, so. So basically, I think where we are is, we had a first reading on Monday night, and, there was some new information presented, with the lot split. And Brian, I know you weren't here, I think you're up to speed on it.
Yes.
I think you may have even had a conversation with Scott today, but, basically with that new information with the lot split, it presented some challenges, maybe not challenges, but questions as far as enforcement and stuff like that on the new code. So I guess probably the first place to start is there any new information, Scott, that's come up since, any discussions, any new information, any ideas on how to deal with that's come up since our last council meeting?
There's been some discussions, we had that today, in terms of people put an easement, blanket easement on the property where the city then is the enforcement party. It has timeframes for landscaping, installation, road easements for water, sewer, et cetera. Then, that could relate to how permits are issued and, reviewed. So it would give the city some teeth with that. How that's all vetted, what that looks like, we don't know. So that was one option. Another one was to do it with the plat, although I know the city does not want the interior roads to be public. However, they could still be platted with private roads. Another option, we discovered this today, is section 1261, that's included in the packet. Essentially has somewhat of a mechanism by which a limitation text could be attached to the rezoning. Just doing a blanket limitation text, speaking with Brian, correct me if I'm correct, is not possible, but it could be included, so to speak, with the provisions of 1261.
Okay.
Some of those items were discussed. I think tonight, we're just kind of look to have the discussion with the development committee to see what they find most appealing, and then we can pursue that option to show you how that looks from there.
And I know that you have not had a lot of time to review this since your meeting was just today, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but of those options, and this is for you or Brian, what would work best for the residents of the city as far as being able to enforce the screening and that, the code, and what would work, what's legal, what can and can't we do, I guess, what, just your general thoughts, I guess, for both of you, if you've had time to review it. If not, I totally understand.
So the easement, as long as we can address enforcement, that was my basic concern about doing deed restrictions where the city is not signatory to that, and has no enforcement ability. It would be self-policing, and I personally wasn't comfortable with that. I think if the easement is created, it can address some of the concerns from the committee, and it could be crafted in a way that allows, the zoning to enforce the easement language. There is chapter 1261, but essentially it's kind of like the limitation text that Mr. Walter alluded to. The issue I see with it as written now is it says it's non-transferable. So Tim were to come and buy it, it does not go with the property to him. So in order to move that forward, it's likely we need to amend the code to strike that. Could an easement, or excuse me, could a variance be granted? There's different possibilities, but without having time to fully vet it, it's tough to say.
Scott, without it having, just a quick question, and then I'll see what Mr. Zetz has to say, but the transferable part, is that, I guess, you sell it to Tim, right? You sell your property to Tim, it doesn't transfer. But essentially, because we have the new code in place, they're still protected by that code. Is that correct? Is that?
That's correct. It would be rezoned, so the
Right.
land manufacturing regulations would apply. But chapter 1261 would put additional restrictions on the property. But that would just be, if I'm rezoning it, it would just be for me. As soon as I go to sell it, those additional restrictions would go away, and it would just be the standard land manufacturing regulations.
Okay. Mr. Zetz, you have anything?
No, I mean, that's, Scott and I had talked about all those things today, and I agree with everything he said. I think that 1261 is a useful tool, but as Scott said, I'm not really sure, given that it's non-transferable, the way it's drafted, I don't think it is as useful as we all would like it to be, just because, even if you're not talking about Fair Lady, I think you're talking about any property, it's, at the end of the day, there's gonna be someone developing it and transferring it, so
Right.
that might be something that council looks into, but into changing it, so that's probably not the most applicable tool here. And I struggled with the idea of, well, how do we, given that this has already gone through rezoning, through planning and zoning, and then you're now at the council stage of that zoning, it's like, well, how do you shoehorn that back into a 1261? Because under 1261, I looked at it sort of like it's just an overlay, because it's a rezoning under the straight rezoning, but you can sort of add that layer of restrictions in there. And I think it might be hard to try and get this to a point where, like, well, how, you've already got through that step of planning and
So
zoning.
it may
it's
work this 1261 may work in some cases, but maybe not in this one.
Probably not the best here, and quite honestly, I mean, I think council I'd tell council to take a real look at whether or not they want to keep that idea that it's non-transferable going forward. It could be a good option for a straight zone with, instead of a planned development, but probably not the best option here.
Okay, so the plating and the easement, what's your thoughts on that? If this part of the code isn't, what about the other two options?
Yeah, and I said this to Attorney Tangeman, when I talked to her actually probably a couple times now about this whole thing. I had never seen that before, but then I don't claim to know and see everything, so when she sent it over, I looked at it and said, actually, I thought it was an interesting idea, because, I mean, what you're doing is basically laying an easement over it. The draft that she sent over was just a boilerplate, but if you look at that draft, it's like, person-owned parcels 1, 2, and 3. And basically, those are referred to as the parcels, and then what you did is you just laid this easement on top of all 3 of those parcels that then would run forever with the land, that would give you the right, in that case, it looked like it's a way that you can take that big chunk of property and lay that easement on, so to basically say, look, this is gonna all be developed sort of together, probably in different phases, but there's going to be easements for roads, for sewers, and for landscaping over the entire thing. I was intrigued by it. I think it's an interesting idea, and it's one that I think could work. Because it's not really deed restriction. When I think of deed restriction, I go back to like my property law school days, and like a deed restriction is really like, I write a restriction in my deed. Like, I have a piece of property and I'm gonna transfer it to you, and I say, this property can never be transferred to, a University of Michigan fan. Sorry.
I'm in for that.
He's
Okay,
Easy.
that's a deed restriction. I had to do that.
I get it.
And, and the city can't enforce those, because that's a private contract. So this, this isn't really a deed restriction, it is truly like a complete overlay easement. So, basically it puts the easements in there for the zoning, and then what Scott and I talked about enforcement, that's the idea that then, you're not going to give out zoning permits or building permits until, the idea of however this is gonna be landscaped and screened at whatever phase is agreed to. So, and then installed by the time the building's up and operational, they're not gonna get a final, permit to actually occupy the building.
So you think that's probably the best option?
Yeah, cause I think it takes away from what our initial concern, and that is, well, the middle 50 develop, and then you have no way of telling the fair lady who owns the the outside parcels, well, somebody's gonna go on this piece of property and install landscaping, cause the easements are all there.
Last question, then I'll open it up. If that was the path we took to put an easement, would that have to go back through the planning commission? Is that just a motion to amend? What's?
Honestly, I don't think it's either one of those, cause I think it's kind of lives outside I'm kind of looking out to Jill to get her thoughts, and I see her shaking her head, yes. Because the idea is that this would be drafted, agreed to by us and by the property owner, and then actually signed and recorded before that's split. So, that could be done, recorded as part of the chain of title that will, forever be, and Scott asked a good question today, and that is, well, how do we know that it won't be changed later on? These agreements are set forth so that it can only be amended if the city's part of that amendment. So, if someone were to go out, try and go rogue and try and amend it and try and change it without our knowledge, they would have a very hard time selling that property, because when a title search is later done, when they decide to split the lot, create a new lot, title search is done, this is gonna show up forever, so you couldn't go out on your own and try and change the easement without the city's approval, because honestly, it wouldn't be insured by the title company.
So
It'd be an
at what
exception on the
point-
title.
At what point would that be, obviously, this is on the table and it has to be brought off and still go through 2 readings and voted on. Where would that come into play if it were to pass?
Well, I guess we have to talk, I had talked with Attorney Tangeman on the exact timing. I mean, we could do it quickly to get it done and signed, it's just then we have to talk about then, is it actually done before the final 3rd reading? Well, I guess we could figure the timing out, and maybe it can be in place before final approval by council. We didn't get that far into the weeds, but it could be something that could be plugged in wherever we believe it's best to be done.
But it doesn't have to be amendment.
No, I don't think you have, no, because it's really not part of the original thing that was before planning commission, and it's not, I mean, there's something that I guess council could consider that is being done on a same track, same time track is the final council decision, but I don't think that's become part of that decision
Okay,
officially.
thank you. Andy?
Oh, go ahead, Mr. Gaelic, if you'd like. I'm still trying to, so I'll tell you, Brian, I'm not necessarily agreeing with you on the non-transferable part of this. The way I guess I read it is that the area is not transferable to another area. So I'm trying to, and I've got to read it a few more times here to come up with that. Because it doesn't talk about an applicant transferable, it talks about an area. Plan districts are areas. So an area may be unique and so forth and so on. The plan districts provide a means to modify zoning regulations for specific areas defined in specific plans or studies. Each plan is non-transferable. So I'm not saying I necessarily have come to that, but when I looked at this originally and thought about its being applicable to this situation, I didn't read the transferableness of it or the non-transferableness of it from owner to owner. I read it from area to area. So for instance, an overlay area, a plan overlay area, let's just use for hypothetical, in my mind, the way I'm looking at this. Say half of the Fair Lady acreage has this plan overlay, right? And the other half doesn't. And they're both PM district type things. You can't take this plan and transfer it to the other half of the PM district. That's the way I'm seeing this, Brian. I'm not necessarily arguing with you. I'm just pointing it out that I just don't see this as ownership transferability. I see it as area transferability. So that's, again, I've got to look at it a few more 10 times maybe, but that's how I see it. Again,
Okay. Sure. I mean, I just read the word, each plan district has its own non-transferable set of regulations.
so,
Is what that sentence-
again, so I'm thinking of that as an area, as not an ownership. So I'm not saying, because nowhere does it talk about ownership in this chapter. It doesn't talk about a person owning it, it talks about zoning, and when I think of zoning, I think of areas. When I think of areas, I think you can't take one area and apply that same plan overlay to another area that has the same zoning characteristic, or the same zoning code, or zoning, character. Again, I'm only,
I think the
Throwing
fact
that
that
out
it's
that it's-
debatable is an issue with the language of that, those
Okay.
7 words.
I agree with you. If you take those 7 words out of
There's
this
10 words.
discussion,
10 words.
10 words, if you take that out, then this chapter actually does really, help with this situation and potentially other straight zonings that could come in if you needed to have limitation text included in a straight zoning. And limitation text isn't really the right word,
But I
but
get,
qualifiers to
Right.
what is gonna happen when X happens or Y happens. I think that this, to me, that's what this chapter is about. Not pinning it down to one owner.
Okay.
So, sorry, guys.
Well, I had a comment, but I wanna make sure, Brandon, you have something, Brandon?
No, you're good.
Brian, even if, let's say, you know, the lawyers hash this out and Andy's right, hypothetically, this still wouldn't work because it has to go back, it would have to go to commission.
Well, that would be the next question.
yeah, I mean, that's how do you get
So
it?
even if it did work for this, it wouldn't, because how do you send it back?
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting, it's a review by both planning commission or council, I mean, every 5 years. It's an interesting.
Well, that's after, they're talking
It's
about the
after,
initial,
right.
yeah, the initial, the rezoning
So-
happens according to a rezoning under 1217.
Right, so it would have to be, and the way this would have to happen, you'd have to do the PM district first, because it has to be, and then pass the plan overlay on top of it after that. Is that the order that you're kind of thinking of it?
I would think you could, I think you could do it all as one application, yeah, you're
I think
sort of,
we go
yeah.
through together, cause it talks about adoption process in chapter 1217, and that's the rezoning process.
Yeah, I think
So
you
I
could,
think it'd just be an addendum to the rezoning application.
yeah, it'd almost be like a straight rezone per
So probably we'd have to go
1261,
back under this.
with 1261 regulations.
Can we even send something back to planning commission? we've never
I
done that.
don't believe that's one of the 3 choices, it's approve, disapprove, approve with conditions,
Okay.
pretty sure.
So that's not an option, so we're back to the easement.
Okay. I'll look at the easements one.
And that easement, that part of the packet is the one that they'd sent over, I mean, it's by example only, we talked about, you know, we could, there could be different, better language for us, this was just a sample template that had been used before in Columbus. And, you know, apparently, and like I said, I don't sit on the developer side of really anything done in Columbus, but, you know, apparently Columbus, Hilliard? Hilliard, see, I don't remember things I heard today. Columbus Hilliard uses, this type of easement, and, you know, Columbus enforces their code with it.
Do you have any reservations with the easement, or do you need more time to look it over?
I would, if this is the direction we're going, I would just like to kind of work with Brian, vet it, work with the applicant, and kind of come up with an approach to say, here's what we've kind of sketched out.
How about you, Timmy, you got anything?
Pardon my voice. I don't, not necessarily, as I listen to the different options, I know that, I think we could say no. Council could say no and go back through with the other option. If the pleasure of council is to do the, what you just talked about, I would like Scott to have some more time to look at it.
Okay. Chris, you got?
No, sir, I'm good.
What? Oh.
Yep.
You want to go first?
If you don't mind me asking a question,
I took up all the air, didn't I? How about-
the parties of this are the existing landowner and the city? Is that the way the easement's written? Or would be written?
I don't remember what.
If you need to come up and comment on that, go for it.
Maybe be helpful, just
Name
so
and
I give
address.
some context. Jill Dangaman, Boris Sater, Seymour and Pease on behalf of Fair Lady. This, again, was a form that Columbus has used for 10, 15 years. And I thought it was Brian and I had talked a couple of times, and then I woke up in the middle of the night one night, and I was like, wait a minute, we've done this before, just in different context. And I thought Columbus was a good example because a lot of the suburbs and surrounding communities use a lot more planned districts, and that was obviously what we were struggling with here. Columbus tends to use straight zoning districts and very rarely uses planned districts. And because of that, they have this same problem, where we often have lots where properties either being taken down in phases, it can't be combined because it's in different taxing districts, can't be combined because of incentives, all kinds of reasons. And Columbus has had the same issues where, you know, their expectation is it's developing as one property, one site. So what they do is they come back to me and say, all right, we know you can't combine all the parcels, you need to put, they call them deed restrictions, but it's basically an easement agreement on first before we will issue any building permits that says this site's gonna operate as one. There are cross-access easements to address whatever the issues are. I threw out to Brian just a sample one. Usually it's utilities and roads in our case, but sometimes it's utility, roads, landscaping, whatever the issues are that need to be addressed on these various parcels. It's usually done as a declaration by the property owner at the time, and then gives enforcement rights to the city of Columbus for either it can't be amended without their authority, they have the right to enforce it, and they definitely do, I can tell you that much. I mentioned to Brian, I had done one probably 10 years ago, and the, you know, multiple property owners down the line tried to amend it without getting Columbus's approval, and then when they went to sell the property, the title company flagged it and said, this isn't enforceable, we're not gonna insure it. So they contacted me because I drafted the original one and had to go back through and get Columbus's approval to do all that. So they absolutely do work in that regard. And I've used the same kind of similar form with Hilliard and Gehanna, I think, as well. I think asking about the parties to it, in this case, Columbus has it done as a declaration by the property owner. I think in the one I did in Hilliard, it was Columbus, or it was the property owner and Hilliard were parties to it. I don't really have a preference, so if, you know, that gives some more comfort to Pataskala, we can make them a property owner. And I think we talked a little bit on the phone call today about tailoring it so it's a little more specific. Again, this was just a shot in the dark of format that I had used before, but I think we could add some provisions to make sure it's clear that enforcement is in your mayor's court, so, you know, we can have kind of a venue clause of where it's getting enforced. And the other thing I think we can do is, in terms of timing, the seller's willing to put this on now, but we could say, you know, it becomes effective with the zoning or something like that. So that, you know, that it all gets done before you guys approve the final zoning on the project. So I think I think the form that I gave you works generally, but I think it needs some work between Brian and Scott and I probably to get it to specific to our situation.
How long do you think that usually goes before it takes effect, before it sits on the property? Does it have to be filed? Does it have to be,
Effective as soon as I record it.
so it has to be recorded?
Yeah, it has to be recorded.
Okay.
So as soon as, I think your county's pretty good about getting things recorded fairly quickly, so.
No, Licking County's not too bad.
No, so I think usually I mean, once we agree on a format, I can make it effective pretty quickly.
Thank you. Andy, this is kind of your world. What,
Oh,
I'm kind of leaning on you to get your thoughts.
Yeah, we deal with easements all the time, and it's just a matter of how they're written and what, yeah, and I think that, you know, Brian and Scott would obviously be very influential to how that's written, to make sure that the concerns that have been voiced are taken care of through this. You know, I think that we have put in very good baseline information for the PM district in general, or PM zoning. And as long as they're followed and it's enumerated within the easement and enforceable by the city, even if the area is not, in this case, if it's subdivided and there's an area that turns out not to be developed, the easement's still enforceable to that area. So, or vice versa, the area is smaller,
my concern is when you subdivide and you've got PM district on either side of the subdivided, property, that you don't have this, the restrictions or the requirements change between different uses. And that's one thing I wanna make sure an easement takes that into an account, so that you have to make sure that the perimeter, if you're gonna use the perimeter as your buffer, great. Perimeter of the whole site as your buffer, great. If you're gonna use the perimeter of the subdivided area, that's fine too, seems to use up more ground, but you have to treat it as if they're separate, or they're different, zoning districts, in essence, until that area develops. So it's gonna be a tough one to write. It's gonna be a tough one to put together to make sure that cause you could have 2 different subdivided areas on this same property. You have 4 different subdivided areas, whatever the case. I don't know that you're gonna do that or want to do that. I'm just saying hypothetically, from the city's point of view, because we have no control how they do it. As long as they meet the code for subdividing, they subdivide. So that's the only thing, is we just have to write it so that it's, that it represents and confirms all the issues that we have within the PM zoning. And Brian, that's a tall order, to do within an easement. If it's too generalized, then it doesn't mean anything to the mayor's court. I would propose that Scott would be the enforcer, mayor's court would be the one that would be the arbitrator, I guess.
You're not really enforcing you're enforcing you're not enforcing the easement, you're enforcing some non-compliance with the zoning code. So like if they're saying, in a situation like, well, we're not gonna issue a final occupancy unless you've done the things you've needed to do, and then, not that home builders have done that here in the city, but, you sell a house and somebody moves in, like, oh, by the way, you don't have a final occupancy permit, so you go back to that home and be like, you have to do A, B, and C, because you're not really enforcing the fact they didn't do A, B, and C, you're enforcing the fact they're in the house living in it without a final occupancy. That's the regulation you're not really going to be enforcing different aspects of you're not enforcing the easement or how it's operating, you're enforcing some other part of it that that they've agreed to do and not completed.
Well, and I understand that, but if an easement in normal terms or in basic terms, or easements as Jill said, over water lines, over storm sewers, in roadways and so forth, those are just your normal everyday easements.
Right.
This is something that's a little different. We're using this as a way to require certain things to happen outside of a subdivided area that's being developed. That's the way I understand that this is being presented. So for instance, the developer will only buy out of the acreage, they buy a quarter of the acreage.
Right.
And they're gonna develop that acreage. If all of the acreage is zoned PM, then portions of their boundary will not have the same buffering requirement between a PM district and a different district, because it'll be adjacent to a PM district. Right? So the idea, as I understand it, this is supposed to give the city some ability to enforce the overall PM district requirements in that first phase of the development. Could be in the second phase of the development, wherever you subdivide. That's the concern. It's not necessarily getting a water line easement on the property. That's not my concern.
Because those are 2 different questions. Because
They are 2 different questions, and that's the concern.
Well, because the easement will give you the ability to go out on a property not owned by the person who gets the first 50 acres. Because otherwise you have no ability to go out there and tell someone who owns the outside parcel that there has to be landscaping out here. Go ahead,
Right.
Jill.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to kind of respond back to you. The purpose of doing this is to keep a subdivided property, however it's subdivided, operating as one site. And so I think as Brian started to allude to, we would, if we get an occupancy permit for any piece in that puzzle, we've got to put the landscaping on the boundary that's adjacent to the residential. And so because it's gonna operate as one site. And the agreement gives us the ability to get off the subdivided parcel and onto the balance of the property. So I don't think we wouldn't ever be in a situation where we subdivide and that subdivided parcel is then operating separately from the rest of the site. So, you know, that we would be in a position where we're wanting to put landscaping on just the subdivided parcel. The goal here is that, and this site is exactly what the issue is. We have to operate as one site. We have one point of access, we have shared water and sewer lines, we have shared roadways, and we have shared landscaping. We have to operate as one site. So the idea here is even though we've broken it up into pieces because of financing and because of taxes and whatever other reasons, it's one site. So it gives us clearly the ability to put on the landscaping in the boundary before we get any occupancy permits, and then it gives you the right to enforce that.
Okay, so my question would be, does it obligate you to, so let me ask it in a different way. So if you subdivide and you've gotten the zoning, and let's say there is an easement in place for you to do the landscaping, that's great. But does it obligate you to put that landscaping in until the subdivided area, until the non-subdivided area is developed?
Yeah.
So that's
It
the way you're
requires-
writing this, is that the
You
first, no matter where it is within the site,
Right,
the first development that occurs requires you to put the boundary landscaping in and do the things that the
Right.
PM district would require you to do. It's not PM district, but the PM zoning
Right.
would require you to do if you were zoning and, I'm
It
sorry, if you were
wasn't
developing the
subdivided.
entire site.
correct,
Without
exactly.
subdividing.
And that's the whole, and that's the same reason why we do this in Columbus, because a lot of times for Columbus, the bigger driver for them isn't always landscaping, it's water and sewer lines. As you probably know, they require separate taps for every single parcel. So this becomes their enforcement mechanism to say, you gotta put it all in and do all of the work for the whole site at one time.
Okay,
And
and that would
so-
also apply to, because this has a single entrance, you would have to do the improvements to the roadways that you would have to do if
Yep.
you were doing the whole site, even if you were to doing one building, your improvements would have to be done. So-
Yeah, the
okay, just
utilities and
clarifying
those
that.
kinds of things are all gonna have to go together. So that's, I think that's the idea here, is we're gonna develop this, all the shared stuff has to happen at once. Now, the buildings themselves will come online when they come on, whenever that is, you know, as we probably have end users, but the shared stuff's all gonna have to happen first.
And wouldn't that hold true, that's me, wouldn't that hold true for the entire perimeter of the site?
Correct, that's exactly so if we, right now, we're contemplating kind of the center 40 acres, I think, as the first phase. So when we do that first phase, we're gonna put the shared stuff in at the same time, so, and that includes the perimeter landscaping.
So, I'm sorry to,
No,
if you don't
keep-
mind. So are you talking about storm, if this has regional ponds, are you talking about putting in regional ponds at the time? Are you
Right.
putting, even if
Yeah.
it didn't, so you're gonna develop all your infrastructure, not all, you don't have to put roads in necessarily, but anything that portion is dependent upon would be put in initially
Right.
on some portion of the site that might
yes.
not be subdivided or owned by you.
Right, yeah,
Okay.
storm is probably the most significant
Yep.
one, and then utilities are likely the other. Roads can kind of come online as they're necessary,
Well,
but,
this solves your problem with, if you were trying to put your entrance in an area that wasn't subdivided and owned by
Right.
you, you could put that
Yeah.
road in.
and as I told Brian, the interesting thing about this whole conversation was, this was always our plan. We can't make this work without having those cross easements, so that we can put that shared storm, shared utilities, shared roadways in at the same time. It just won't work, you know, because we have one entrance, we have limited room for shared storm and all those kinds of things. So it is, you know, regardless, the subdividing is a function of taxes and financing.
Right.
And so we were gonna do this no matter what. So now the question of enforcement and timing and all those kinds of things came up. So putting Pataskala in the enforcement and in the chain is really unusual. That makes sense now.
Brian, within this easement, obviously with a straight zoning, we can't do stipulations, correct?
Correct.
And I would assume we still can't do that. For example, one thing that's important to me personally is Summer Road, and that the screening, because it's a connector, correct, right?
Collector.
Collector. Graham is a rural in our classifications, correct?
Correct.
So Summit doesn't have to be screened as aggressively as Graham does. So, it's important to me that we try and get that, and I don't know that we have a mechanism to make that a stipulation for them to screen Summit the same way Graham is screened, do we?
I don't believe you do, no.
Are you guys willing to do that?
As far as I'm aware, yeah.
That'll take
My
care of it.
instructions have been to address the landscaping however
I'm just
council wants
asking.
it addressed. I think
We
in,
get rid of these because
Yeah.
have
we
no
could
record.
voluntarily do, I mean, I think what we're talking about is putting these restrictions on before you pass the zoning, which
Yeah.
is fine. So to the extent that we can address any landscaping concerns, we'll
Does that make
voluntarily
sense
do
what I'm
it.
saying? Because if you look at, and I'm sure you have, but, I mean, Summit Road is still screened well as a collector.
Mhm.
But our rural roads, we really put some, you know, some, what we think are good standards. So I just personally would like to see Summit. I can't hold you to that, obviously, but I'm gonna say,
I think we can
I don't think Brian
voluntarily
likes it, I said
offer
that.
and include that in our restrictions, or our easement agreement.
Brian, you're giving me that look.
No, we're good.
Okay, all
Oh,
right,
I'm all good right now.
Okay.
All good in this chair.
all right.
We'll just say, we thought that was a good idea.
I like that.
Brian, I have a question about how the enforcement side of that works. Should it not happen? We've talked about mayor's court. Mayor's court is slow by design. How do we,
People take offense to that.
well, I mean, usually when we undertake an enforcement action, there are a series of steps.
Correct.
And so that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be the same process. Again, it's just like the same thing. Say, that would likely happen. Eventually, you wouldn't issue some final permit of some sort of, and then they would try and occupy it. And then, yeah, you would go through the same notification process as you would in any,
Magistrate Kelsey would be the person that would hear that?
yes, yeah, it would be like any other zone, really like any other zoning enforcement. I mean, it's just the subject matter is different, but yeah, we end up sending out the letters, Felix would do his thing. Eventually, we would hopefully get compliance like you do, like you hope with all people who come to mayor's court for zoning violations, and then, before you ever get to mayor's court, but then if some reason it doesn't happen, for whatever reason, yeah, it would be, just a charge filed and be one of the green files on that day's docket.
Okay.
And there's usually for what it's worth, there's usually hefty penalties when you're talking about, if you're talking about high grass and things like that, that's really not, those aren't the biggest of fines, but you're talking other, like real zoning issues that usually carry hefty fines. And TIP's not one to shy away from a hefty fine.
Well, and in this case, I think we're talking about, we don't do it, you don't issue the occupancy permit, we then occupy it
Right.
without an occupancy permit. Yeah, I think that's a pretty serious violation.
Yeah.
So,
Scott, what occupancy permit do we issue?
So how it would work, let's say Acme Widget come and we're gonna build on this 40 acres. Great, we can issue the permit to build. Granted, that has to go through plan manufacturing regulations, so it's planning commission, recommendation to council, council has final say to say, yes, go build. At that time, planning and zoning department can issue a zoning permit for them to build. Dependent upon how the language is written, that might trigger them putting in all perimeter landscaping, however that's written. So, okay, you got your permit to build, that now triggers you putting in perimeter landscaping according to this agreement. So they're building, putting in landscaping, let's say they only got Summit and didn't do the rest. Acme Widgets is ready to open. They have to get a certificate of compliance where we go out and inspect and say, okay, you built what you said you were gonna build. If they don't get that and they are operating without that, that's $100 a day. Every day is a new violation, so that can rack up. And then that would go to mayor's court, and essentially they pay a fine, and then we start back again until the mound is in for this agreement.
Okay.
And there's no real good way there's no way to make that quicker, but on the flip side of that, at $100 a day from the day the notice of violation is issued to the time you get to mayor's court, to the time you fight about, you got a lot of days in between there, so, it's, not the quickest, but those two add up, those days.
Okay.
If there's no other comments, Brian, procedurally, I would assume the best way to bring this up to council, this option, is to remove it from the table for discussion.
You could, but if you remove it from the table, I think arguably you'd have to read it a second time. I think you could probably have a discussion when you talk about the development, you give your development committee report.
Just do it within committee chair reports, and then council can make a decision
Yeah.
from there if they wanna bring it off the table and read it.
Well, I mean,
I wouldn't do
I
it
wouldn't
yet.
bring it off the table until we're close to having
That's where I was headed with that.
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think at the next council meeting, who knows where we'll be, but you can absolutely report on your development committee report what we're talking about in council. You guys, cause you could talk about it,
Yeah,
but you don't have to pull it, cause just assume we're not ready at that point in time, then don't, just keep it tabled. And then you guys could talk about it, get a flavor of whether council's, what council thinks about the idea and things, and answer some questions. And then, assuming there's no huge red flags, we'll just proceed forward, or if there's some issues, then we take it back, I can talk with Jill and Scott, we'll kind of work on those things a little bit to try and I'd like it to get to a spot where at least myself and Scott, we're kind of comfortable with this product, and then to eventually say, okay, council, here's the idea, and
the only reason I even brought that up is cause it's just if it was a third reading, I get it, but since it's just a second reading, is just bring it off, let it go through the second, have discussion if we want, and then see where we're at on the third, or you think just leave it on the table?
I just leave it on,
Okay.
I mean, I would leave it on the table.
That's fair, I just wanted to be ahead of that, so.
Yeah.
Okay, I may lean on you during my committee chair report to help me explain that, so. Is there anything else on this?
No, sir.
Okay.
And that would be the committee report at the February 5th?
Yeah, we give, any committee that meets gives a report back to council, it'll be at the next council meeting.
Okay.
So, and then you guys can just report
Be here
together
to
and
answer questions.
report back to us.
Okay, yeah, we'll start to work on a draft and we'll see where we're at.
I don't know that we necessarily need another development committee meeting when you're done, I think we can hash that out at council.
I think so.
Or what do you think?
I think you could.
I think so.
Well, I think if everything goes well.
That's fine.
Yeah, if everything goes well and there's consensus between Scott and Brian and the developer, I think that we can take it to the council to discuss it there. If not, I think it's probably worth having another discussion about it and if it's working or not working.
Is that fair, then we'll just?
Oh, yeah, I would agree with that, yeah, if we could, but I guess my assumption was, at some point, we'll be able to.
You guys can come to some type of an agreement, just bring it to council, if there's a stalemate somewhere, we'll just come,
Yeah.
bring it back here and talk
Okay.
about it.
Yeah.
I mean, we may argue a little bit between now and then, but I mean, eventually we should be able to get something that
I
will.
think we can figure it out.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, on to the Jersey Township discussion. I think best way to do this is, Mr. Platt, come on up and why don't you, tell us what you're thinking?
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Members of council, appreciate your time this evening. My name is Rob Platt. You guys know I'm a person of many different roles. I'm here as Jersey Township's administrator. Township address 1481 Mink Road. Personally, I reside at 371 Woodside, so as I look at the faces up here, I'm probably the closest resident to this site in proximity as far as those that are seated up there. What Jersey is put together is kind of a concept we'd like for you all to consider, and perhaps the entire council if you see fit. We have a proposal, kind of high level. We don't necessarily have the details worked out, but this development has kind of spurred us to think about a few different things. Certainly what we're proposing does not intend to hinder anything that you guys are doing. Certainly you're gonna move forward with your plus or minus 200 acres here that's in the city of Pataskala, but there is I don't know, somewhere around 18 or 20 acres of the northern part of this that is in Jersey Township. And as we kind of see this development project move through, the township then is kind of looked at. That is a major corridor. Morse Road is in Jersey Township. You all know it as a Licking County maintained road. Arguably, it is the western entrance, if you will, into the historic part of Jersey, or what ultimately will be preserved as the historic part of Jersey. I can share with you that the township is working with its CIC, and we do have a historic preservation committee that's working to preserve preserve some of those buildings. So we have an interest certainly in what develops here and what it looks like, especially in the Jersey Township piece. So the things that initially important to us, any kind of development in a shared border area here really should be harmonious with one another. The worst thing you can do is have one type of development approved and right across the line something else that is not cohesive with it. And our interest is to look at the effect and the benefit, good and bad, to the neighbors surrounding that, to the communities both as a whole. It's a shared border between the two entities. We should be working together on it. What is the effect on the infrastructure? And then what is the effect on the school district as well? And that relates back to taxes and things that way. So, you know, we know there's a proposed road coming up through this, so as part of this development and through the Jersey piece out to Morse Road. Certainly that will give access, and that, you know, it's not our place to say, but it seems wise to keep the traffic off of Graham and Summit and things like that. One thing that we have a concern with as the Jersey piece develops is there is, and you all know, you go north on Summit Road to Morse to the dead end. You look to the west, right where Corrigan's house used to be, and you got a hill. It's a blind hill right there, right? Likewise, we have residents to the east there that have called, and I've taken these calls in recent years with concerns of speeding along Morse Road. So the question for us becomes, how do we address those kinds of? Is there anything that we can do to address those? And being that Summit and the Morse intersection is Licking County, certainly the township falls under that. We have an interest in going to the county engineer and saying, hey, we really think that there should be a roundabout at this location, if nothing else, to slow traffic down. You know, people leave the Clark State Beach Morse Road intersection, head east, and there's really no slowing down coming over that hill. Becomes a safety issue. So that's something that we would like to see addressed as the Jersey piece builds out. We think that whoever develops that needs to contribute to a roundabout at that location. I don't purport to be a traffic engineer, but certainly that seems like that would make sense there. We also think that the hill needs taken out to improve the sight distance there. It is horrible, you all know, trying to turn west onto Morse Road there off of Summit, and really you just hope that you don't get hit. So the point being, as we kind of work through this, what Jersey would like to do is work with Pataskala on that piece. There's a few different things that we need to consider here, and we're well aware that that two different entities can act independently of each other. We just think it makes more sense for us to collaborate together. One thing that we've included in our initial proposal, and we've kind of had some initial discussions, is you all have, and the developer made a presentation at your public hearing where there was a revenue estimates from your 1% income tax of about $1 million a year at full build out. Now, you all know, I have to make an assumption, and again, this is an assumption, that there'd be some sort of tax incentive considered there through your CRA program or something like that. And you all know that state law would require you to share half of that with the school district, which is great for schools and the CRAs because you're taking that property out, you all know, out of CAUV, and they're just getting a few dollars off of the property as farmland. They'll get a tax increase, and then they'll get half of that income tax. There's an opportunity there, though, if the city was to have an interest in working with the township to create, you all know JEDs. JED income taxes are a function of township government in the sense of being able to implement them. You have to have a township partner. We would propose that the city consider working with Jersey Township and create a JED on both parcels, all 200 plus or minus, I'm just calling it 220 acres. Whereas the norm seems to be, the city of Columbus is at 2.5% income tax. The surrounding suburbs are there. If you're going to have development, we feel that you should maximize the revenue that's generated to provide money back to the residents that are affected by that, right? To that end, we also think that, and you guys have heard this before, Jersey is a big believer that development should pay for itself, that it should provide a benefit to our residents if we're going to allow it. So to that end, you all could have a 1% income tax that you have in place on your 200 acres. You could work with the township to layer additional income tax through a JED on that, and that would be money then that you could utilize as you saw fit. We would also say, and I'm giving the example of a 2.5% income tax total, then we would do it the same thing with the JED on the Jersey piece. That's way more than the 1% that would ever be generated by the city's income tax on both parcels, or on all 220 acres. That envisions pulling in a municipal partner that has a 2.5% income tax. You all know that I've participated in JED creation, so I can tell you that I certainly have looked at the possibilities here, and I can assure you it can be done to get us a 2.5% income tax there. What I will say, and I appreciate Mr. Hickens sharing it with me, there was a memo provided from a consultant you guys have used and I would say that I do agree with, at least at my initial read of what was provided by Mr. Robinson. But I think there might be a little bit of confusion, at least on what Jersey's proposing. It seems that his response to the city anticipates the city creating a JED by itself within its own boundaries. You can't create a JED without a township partner, at least not under current law. So, it goes on to say in the JED statutes, nowhere does it expressly state that a city can form a JED on its own, and I completely agree, a city can't. So I would say that Mr. Robinson is correct, at least in that initial assessment, but I don't think that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the city and the township working together to layer a JED income tax on top of your 1%. We also feel that NCA should be utilized, and we don't know if that's been discussed, but Jersey Township is definitely requiring those. You all know that we have a significant amount of development pressures along the Mink North Corridor and Worthington Road. We are requiring the NCA creation along there, somewhere in that 9 to 10 mills. We think that the city should do the same. We would have an interest in working with you on the part that's in Jersey as well. We think, honestly, an NCA should be layered upon the whole thing. And those monies generated for that, again, go back to township and city services that we provide our residents. So generally, what I'm hoping to take away from tonight is there an interest by you all to work with the township on the development of both parcels, really? And again, we don't really have an interest in imposing any kind of say on what you guys do on the 200 acres. More so, we have an interest in how the Jersey piece is going to develop. We want to make sure that the design standards are in place to make it make sense with historic Jersey and what we would like to see there. We want to make sure that the infrastructure improvements are made. And we think that working together in a collaborative effort makes more sense than each entity trying to do it by themselves. So we could lead a rezoning on the Jersey Township piece. But again, if there's going to be development on this 220 acres, we definitely feel that mechanisms should be in place on both sides to generate the maximum amount of revenue possible. Because again, if our residents are going to see development in our areas, they definitely should see a benefit through the revenue generated for our entities. So happy to answer any questions. I know that's very high level. We're not looking for any kind of answer tonight. We're asking you all to consider this and then perhaps get back with us. We think there's a real possibility for collaboration there. We think that the two entities working together makes sense. If it stays a farm field, then it really doesn't do anything in that way for revenue, and that's fine at the end if that's what the entities want. But ultimately, if there's some sort of development there, whatever you all approve, we think that a mixed use or commercial retail type component along the Jersey piece, because it does front on Morse Road and it is a major corridor, we think that probably makes the most sense. I use the example all the time at the township with a Longhorn type restaurant. You know, there's a Longhorn right down west on Morse Road, so I don't know that that's necessarily the end user. But it's those kind of uses, some sort of professional office, although office space, there's not a high demand anymore as it used to be. But we do see commercial retail component there as well. So we think that as long as whatever builds on the Jersey piece makes sense with whatever develops in the Pataskala piece, we think that that's the best way to handle that. So happy to answer any questions. We would like you to consider this thought.
Would you go first?
You know, I just looking at this, you gave us a memo. Thanks, Rob, for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
You gave us a memo that was back a little while ago, and it was one that was to the village of Kirkersville. So that's what we got in our packet.
Did I provided that?
I provided it.
Okay, yeah, I don't recall.
So I don't know that these details are necessarily what you guys are wanting to even think about, but
Sure.
my one question would be, in this situation, would this have any link or any, funding for the sewer and water district? Because that does service this area. It's a question that has come up, by our planning and zoning department, or planning and zoning board. Is that something that you guys would want included in that?
I think that, quite honestly, I think that has to be determined by both entities. What I will tell you is, Jersey, and I won't make any assumptions for the city, Jersey's, position, like I said, is development pays for development. So, we definitely, and I'll tell you this kind of in our other areas of the township, we are saying to developers, hey, Jersey residents won't front the cost of any kind of infrastructure. You, as the developer driving that need, will cover those costs, whether they front the money or they put the revenue mechanisms in place to generate the money over time. We don't necessarily care, but that new development is going to pay for that. So if there has to be a component of that to make the project work, we're certainly open to it. We would want to have a like-minded approach with the city as that. But again, we don't anticipate the township coming out of pocket for any kind of infrastructure for the development. We see that it's the developer's responsibility to put those JEDs, NCAs, TIFs, UTILAs, whatever it is. There's things that they can put in place to pay for that, and we think that that's on them to do that.
Okay. It was in your memo here, so that's why I wanted to ask, and I just wanted to find out if that was something that was
Sure.
A requirement. Okay.
Yeah, the Kirkersville project, just incidentally, is neat that is exactly what's happening out there. The infrastructure is being extended into, or is planned or proposed, however you want to say it, to the residents of the village of Kirkersville, but the cost to do so are developer driven. So it's the same thing. The local entities are saying, hey, you're going to sign into a JED, you're going to sign into an NCA, you're gonna generate revenues to pay for the infrastructure costs that you're creating. Oh, and by the way, there's going to be a revenue benefit to the local governments. This is very similar.
I do have a follow-up.
Yep.
So the infrastructure that you mentioned, specifically Morse Road, and the intersection at Summit, none of that is in the city of Pataskala.
That's correct.
We don't have infrastructure that needs improved necessarily
Yeah.
in that area, while the roundabout is a situation with Licking County and the city of New Albany and Pataskala, because they're all touching in that area.
Sure.
The other infrastructure is not really, per se, our responsibility in general.
Yep.
Although we would ask through the traffic study that they've supplied, they have some requirements on township, roadways.
Sure.
To improve. Obviously, they have to go through that approval on their own. That's something that goes through the county and yourselves, obviously, to get approved. So how does that, give me a quick 30-second, general result of that. If this JED/NCA, whatever mechanism you want to choose to talk about, how does that pay for that?
Yeah, so, you're exactly right. The city really shouldn't incur any costs for those, infrastructure improvements that are outside your limits. We completely agree. And so the developer, as that 18 or 20 acres in Jersey develops, is going to be required to make certain improvements, just like you're requiring them in the city limits. We need a revenue mechanism to generate money from that development to pay for those, right? So it is wholly in Jersey, and we certainly recognize that. It goes back to, we could act independently, right? Jersey doesn't have to work with the city for a JED on that, we just feel it makes sense. Likewise, you guys would benefit and generate more money on your 200 acres for whatever, purposes you have. But certainly, we don't see the city incurring costs, for improvements, or paying it out of your revenue.
Okay. That's what, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but
Yeah.
that's what I was kind of asking was,
Yeah.
would there be some type, and I'm going to use a really simple math here, so that's,
Sure,
if you were to say the 200 acres and the 40 acres, so let's just say it's, 4/5 and 1/5 acreage wise.
Sure.
Is that kind of, would you do that on a split of acreage for revenue generated?
Yeah.
And then the second, okay.
Sure.
So you just heard us talk about all the infrastructure and the requirements that we're wanting the developer to do day one. If the first area, whatever they subdivide and so forth and do. So there may be development that doesn't occur in the township, but that day one, I'm just trying to piece this together on how this would all work. If they're developing solely in Pataskala area.
Yep.
And infrastructure is required for us to approve that, meaning the turn lanes that are in solely Jersey Township. How would you see that kind of working together? And I'm not talking about the sewer and water, because that's totally different.
Yeah, you're asking infrastructure improvements located within Jersey, but
That
the
we're gonna
developments-
require, right, that we're gonna require,
Yeah,
through their traffic study, which is the turn lanes essentially, and the improvements that have to happen in Morse Road.
yeah.
For work that's solely in Pataskala, that we would then benefit from the JED, revenue-wise.
Sure.
And the township wouldn't. How do you see that happening?
If I understand your question correctly, if the improvements are in the city, is that what you're asking, within the city limits?
So I'm actually saying that the development's within the city limits.
Okay.
And the improvements are not within the city limits.
Okay, but you're requiring them, right?
Correct.
That doesn't really change anything, at least for how any other project would move forward for us, right? So yes, in that case, if you're requiring that, I think that the improvements, if I'm the city, I make the developer make those improvements. If you work out some sort of reimbursement deal with them through new revenue, that's up to you guys, right? I don't think it really has a negative effect on the township either way. I guess there could be a possibility that we would have similar improvements. Maybe your traffic study requires improvements at Summit and Morse, right, or
It
something
does.
like that.
Well, actually, let's use Morse and Beach.
Okay,
So really, the improvements are out of both of our districts. So there are some,
Yep.
there's an improvement southbound on Beach that's required, I believe it's until the roundabout's built there, if ever,
sure,
whatever.
sure.
There's a required left turn lane on Beach. So, that would not be your responsibility, not our responsibility, it would be solely the developer's responsibility unless they had some type of unless they had some type of reimbursement.
Yeah,
Okay, so now let's move it into your district, which would be what you just suggested, the roundabout and the removal of the hill
Yep.
on Morse. Again, not Pataskala improvements, but related to the development that's occurring, not per our traffic study, but something that you guys may require. Would you look for Pataskala to supply funds from its revenue of a JED or for an NRC or NCA to pay for that?
yeah. I think we would in that case, simply because those improvements whoever's requiring the entity are needed to make the project work, right? And really what the proposal Jersey's bringing, at least the benefit to Pataskala is, you're going to enact or enforce your 1% income tax on this 200 acres, right? You bring in a township partner, then now you have the ability to do you could do more, but another 1.5%, right? So if they're telling you, hey, we're gonna generate $1 million off your 1% income tax, that goes to 2.5, now you're at $2.5 million, right? So the city's gonna see a benefit. If it has to spend off some of that money and the township has to spend off the money to make the project possible, certainly we would ask for the city to consider that. Generally, I mean, the way that this whole proposal really is just taking, hey, this is the baseline revenue, here's the possibilities, right? And so if there's more for everybody, right, the rising tide kind of thing, then I think that it would make sense that it is, give or take, like I said, 220 acres, if there's 200 there and 20 there, and
10%,
maybe it's a percentage split or something like that. We're open to that discussion. Again, it's more of a high-level concept. Are you guys interested in sitting down and working through this?
Sure. Okay, thanks.
Great questions, though. Thank you.
Brandon, do you have any? I got a couple.
I don't, go ahead.
Tim, do you have something?
Yeah, I got a couple. How do you get to 2.5%?
Income
we-
tax?
When we only can tax at 1%, assuming that we're the partner?
Oh, yeah, great question. So, and this goes back to a similar, agreement that's, in the village of Kirkersville. You all have a 1% municipal income tax, and that applies to that 200 acres. And again, I'm using rough numbers for the acreage. Then there's 20 acres that's in Jersey Township where there is no income tax, okay? That's what we currently have right now. And again, I think there's a little confusion on the memo from Mr. Robinson, but if a Pataskala and Jersey Township JED is created with a third partner, which would be a second municipality, that municipality's income tax would apply to the 200 acres at a rate of 1.5% income tax, and to the Jersey 20 acres at 2.5%. So all 220 acres in the end, if I'm working there, if I've got a business there, I'm paying 2.5% income tax.
Okay, I understand that. It would, if I understand the Bricker-Eckler memo correctly, it would have to be New Albany. Is that correct?
That is not correct. The JED law, and I'd be honest with you, it's been a long time since I read the Bricker memo. JED law does require notice to a municipality that has the ability to serve the site if a JED is created. And I think it's a half-mile proximity. It might be a mile,
yeah.
but there is a requirement for, you have to file engineering estimates with that municipality. There is not a requirement to utilize that municipality. The example I'll give you, sorry, I'm a township guy, right? So everything I do is from the township perspective. So Union Township out east there where the National Trail Raceway is, last year put a JED in place with the city of Heath, right? Well, because they were within proximity to the village of Hebron, they had to give notice to the village of Hebron. They had to give engineering estimates for the infrastructure. There's certain requirements under the 71572 under the JED statute. If there is proximity of a municipality, there is no requirement to utilize that municipality. So I guess we've not really dove too far into it, but the way JEDs can be set up with geographical areas and the way that you can kind of structure your partnership, we as Jersey Township would find a municipal partner that has a 2.5% income tax rate. It could be, probably it'd have to go into Franklin County because there are a number of entities in there. And we would basically say, hey, City X, Jersey Township and the city of Pataskala are creating a JED on 20 acres. We want you to be a partner in it, and we're gonna utilize your 2.5% income tax. Those people are gonna pay that. We also are going to create a second JED that over top of the city's 1% income tax on the 200 acres, but we're only gonna structure that JED at 1.5%. You don't have to utilize their maximum income tax rate. We're gonna use 1.5 of your 2.5% income tax rate, so that in the end, it's effectively 2.5 on all the acreage. You would have two JEDs created just at two different rates, so that the total was 2.5%. That makes sense?
It does.
Okay.
It's the half-mile creation of the JED within a corporation that's not signatory to the JED.
They do not have to be.
Do they then have to give approval?
No. They have to be, they are entitled to notice of the creation of the JED, the engineer's estimate for the infrastructure for it. But there is no approval. Again, I go back to the Union Heath JED. Without going into details, Union and the village of Hebron were at odds. Union partnered with Heath for their JED, gave their statutory requirements of notice to Hebron and said, have a nice day. And that was it.
Was that JED in Heath?
I'm sorry?
Was that JED in Heath or Union Township?
Union
It
Township.
was located in Union Township. Yep.
Thank you.
Brian, I'm curious your thoughts.
I'm still trying to figure out which partner is the 2.5, because don't you have to have, you know, it was like, go back to the Evans Farm, you have to include Concord, because you can't get from Township to Shawnee Hills without Concord, so you have to be able to line up these municipalities, so where are you getting the 2.5, and how do you get from there to there? How do you get from here to wherever this 2.5 is now pulled from?
Sure. So the geographical requirements of a JED under 71572 require that, or permit, maybe I should say it that way, that there's only one intervening entity in between the partnership structure of the JED. So what that basically means is no matter how you structure the JED, entities have to be contiguous with the exception of one entity. You can basically hop or skip one entity, which we did.
Right.
And so fortunately for you all, any JED, this is just free info, I guess, any JED that you guys were to create, you guys are contiguous to the city of Columbus. You can jump Columbus and use any suburbs income tax you want. Because as long as your township partner, now keep in mind, has to be contiguous to you. So in this example, Jersey and Pataskla are contiguous. Then you're contiguous to the city of Columbus, but you don't have to include them. But then, and I'll just throw this out, this is not at all don't ever hold this to me, but just for the fun of it, Grove City touches Columbus. You effectively could use Grove City's income tax as a JED partner with a JED that is Grove City, City of Pataskla, and Jersey Township. I'm not proposing that, I'm just saying because they touch Columbus. You could go to the west side of Columbus, some entity over there, Worthington, it doesn't matter. So there are options, I guess is my point. Geographically, you can only have one entity that is not contiguous to the contracting parties of the JED.
Maybe you came, the whole idea of, because you touch Columbus, that means I can use any entity anywhere that touches the city of Columbus, so
That's correct.
maybe I have to look into it. I mean, I don't know. I guess I was also curious about that idea, then you're creating two separate JEDs, one which is just solely inside on the 200 acres that is not inside Jersey Township. I guess that idea.
Yeah,
I think that goes a little bit to the Robinson memo that talks about, because you're creating, it's a separate JED that is now housed solely within the.
It is within the city, but you gotta remember the partnership of the JED still includes Jersey. And Robinson's saying, can the city unilaterally create it, the way I read it, a JED in its boundaries, and you cannot. But you can create a JED in your city, or in your municipality, as long as you have a township partner. So, again, same thing with really that's being contemplated in Kirkersville. They've got a 1% income tax. They'll do the same thing, assuming the plan is that to layer an additional JED on top of their 1% income tax for their new development that comes out. It's not I'm not saying it's a common concept. It is a little bit new, but it certainly can be done.
Rob, do you have a partner in mind with that being said?
I'll be honest with you, I've probably got 3 or 4. And the reason why is, Jersey's not new to the JED game, and neither am I, right? So we've had those discussions, and really, honestly, Brandon, what it comes down to is, when you negotiate the terms of that, when you have a municipal partner, what share of that new revenue are they willing to take? And 20 years ago, when I was at Jefferson Township, there was one proposed with the city of Gahanna, and they wanted I should turn the microphone off. It was like, don't hold me to it, but it was like they wanted like 70% of the revenue. It was something crazy, it didn't make any sense. The one Brian referred to up in Delaware County, I think the municipal partner, 10%, 5%? I don't remember, but it was more in line with what it should be, because really that partner is, the service they're providing is they're enforcing their income tax on those workers in a specified area, but to be fair to them, they have to cover their costs for tax collection fees and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't make sense, but when you look at a partnership structure and you consider who to do that with, really it comes down to what are they willing to work with you on, I guess.
I mean, that's not dissimilar from our own existing JED. We use Newark.
Right.
I just didn't think we could do one within the city limits. I didn't think,
Well,
we
that was,
had one before we had an income tax. I didn't think we could do one when we had one, but.
Yeah.
that was my initial comment to Rob, which is what drove the question of Dave, of Mr. Robinson from Montrose. I don't believe that he understands that you need a partnership with a township to create a JED. That's, I agree, if that was what I asked him. I think he is more concerned about whether or not a municipality can double tax, can put the JED on top and do it, and how clear that is. I think there are places, we had this conversation when the idea popped up. Ask different people, get different answers. And as we work through this concept, if we're willing to do it, to find out how comfortable we are with that legal advice.
Yeah, and I would just say, Tim and I have had a lot of discussions on that, and again, my initial read of Mr. Robinson's memo, the way I see it, understanding it, he's talking about just the city unilaterally doing it, and you definitely have a township partner. But again, I go back to, that this concept is what is envisioned and what the city, or the village of Kirkersville approved in their agreement. It would be the exact same, a municipality layering it on top. For what it's worth, the township's legal counsel has already approved this as a concept that I triple checked today. Hey, you're sure that this can be done? Yes, absolutely. So they're not your legal counsel, right? So you all have to work through that, and I get that. But from our perspective, our position is absolutely this can be done.
Rob, did they rely on the Bricker-Eckler memo to do that?
I'm sorry?
Did they rely on the Bricker-Eckler memo to do that?
I don't know what they relied on. He's a township attorney, so.
Okay, that's why I provided it, because I thought that was the genesis.
Yeah, I know that was done for the water district. The township did not engage Bricker at all. Our legal counsel specializes in townships, right? So, I mean, that's created a number of JEDs also, so.
Okay.
Rob, I got a question. If,
Sure.
Obviously, we're still considering this legislation, what to do with the 200 acres.
Absolutely.
If it were to be denied, would Jersey Township still move forward in some type of a development there?
Certainly we could. I think that Jersey's interest is that whatever develops on the 220 acres as a whole, that it's harmonious, that it makes sense, that the residents benefit from it, that the design and architecture of at least the Jersey piece makes sense with that corridor going into Jersey. In the end, we're talking about 18 or so, 20 acres on a major corridor. For us, what makes the most sense is some sort of retail type component there. It's certainly you could get a data center on 18 or 20 acres, a small one. They exist in Delaware County. I know it can be done. We don't know that it makes the most sense to fit a giant concrete building right up against Morse Road. So we definitely think that a retail component makes sense there. Would we ask the landowner or the developer to move forward without that? I honestly don't know the answer to that. Our preference is to do it in step with what the city would have on its 200 acres. We're looking for collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, and I get it, and I like collaboration too, but I mean, and this is a hypothetical, right?
Sure,
I'm not
sure.
suggesting this is gonna happen, it's a hypothetical.
Yeah.
It's a prime piece of ground in a prime location. If council were to deny this, the next one that could be in front of us is 600 homes. Right? Like
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
not saying council would or wouldn't support that, but something's going
We
to
would
go
hope not.
there, right? But I'm just saying that
Yeah.
is a hypothetical that could be presented to us.
Yep.
So I'm just curious what your plans would be if it wasn't something that you either A, envisioned, or B,
Yeah,
we
I
didn't
think,
support.
I think the reality is, like I said, it's a major corridor. Retail, commercial type uses make sense there. So if just again hypothetically, you guys, the council didn't move forward with approving that's on the 200 acres, could Jersey? Yeah. Do we think if it's your 600 homes, is it data centers, is it whatever it is? I don't know that it necessarily matters, because I don't know that on the retail component, because it's still gonna be hopefully my Longhorn Steakhouse or something like that, right? Those type uses probably don't change a whole lot. It's gonna serve the area as a whole, not just that 200 acres. Our hope is though, that at least if we do move forward, I will tell you this, and I go out on a limb here and hope that you guys would agree to this. If Jersey was to move forward, we would wanna make sure that whether you guys have approved anything or not, that you're at the table having the discussions of what that looks like with us, because ultimately whatever goes on the 200 acres, if it happens to come second, needs to match what goes on the 20 acres, right?
Right.
So the question becomes, hey, Tim, can you come to our meetings, or how, you know, or can you guys, or something like that, as we work through that.
Okay. I've got a thought, but is there any other questions before I just kind of ask a couple questions of the administration? Andy, do you have anything?
I'm good.
So, I guess, what are you looking at? I would ask Tim, Scott, Chris, and what are you guys looking at from us as a committee? You know, are you looking for direction on, you know, I mean, we're not gonna vote on anything, right, or approve anything, but are you looking for direction to begin fact-finding discussions? Are you, what,
Well, I think my thought originally was, I don't think that I could have done what Rob just did justice. That's why I wanted him to come in because I get questions popping up. You guys have just asked him a series of questions tonight that I don't think I could have answered.
right,
So I wanted first to put it in front of the development committee, to give them an opportunity to say, we're not interested in this, or we think we can't put a jet in the city, or whatever you wanted to say, or yes, woo, let's look into it. I did not expect a final answer to come out of that. Darn it. Excuse me. I did not expect a final answer to come out of this. But what I was hoping was, you know, let's look into, if that's the desire. So you knew we were moving forward with, and I don't have a problem doing that, moving forward with looking, maybe talk to Montrose again, give Brian another chance to look into what he feels about it, and then come back and say, is that something that you're interested in doing? Probably comes, so this idea originally was discussed in early December, but we did not have another development committee meeting. But, you know, it seems like the nexus, this is happening at the same time that the Fair Lady property is attempting to get their stuff through. That was not my intent, because when you get multiple things with one property, it often tends to gum it up a little bit. And so I did not want it to happen that way, but that is how it happened. So, having us investigate whether all those things that I said was my goal, and to also put this in front of you, let Brian hear about it, so we can, you know, if you guys absolutely say no way, then we know. And if you say, okay, you've piqued our interest, do some investigations, then we know that too. And I didn't think I could do justice
yeah.
to what Rob was suggesting.
I mean, just speaking for myself, I think that I would be in favor of investigating it, seeing if it's legal, looking at all these questions. I think we wouldn't be doing, you know, anyone any justice if we didn't at least look into it and see what the possibilities are. I'm not saying I'm for or against it, but I think I'm for going to the next step of investigation and seeing what the possibilities are out there. And I think at the same time, while you guys, because this isn't gonna happen overnight, but while you guys are investigating it, we'll obviously know what's gonna happen with the Fair Lady legislation in the meantime. So maybe you guys work together and do your thing, and by the time you have something, we'll know what's happening up there. And, you know, that seems like a reasonable plan to me. Andy, what's your thoughts? Brandon?
I mean, I'll say I agree. I didn't know this was even a possibility until you came in tonight to talk about this, so I'm definitely intrigued on the possibilities, and it doesn't hurt to look into, like you said. So.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's not hurting us anything to look into it.
Might as well.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm certainly, again, not asking for any kind of action tonight.
Yeah.
What I first said when I walked up here is, we have no interest in weighing in on what you guys do on your approvals, and that should continue on, and that's, we just, you know, this is like the next piece of it, right? And
Right.
and there's potential here for both entities, and so we'd just like to work with you on that.
I'm all ears. And to answer your question earlier, we have discussed an NCA.
Great,
We
okay.
haven't really gone anywhere with that yet.
We've not.
So maybe throughout your guys' discussion, that'll evolve. That conversation will,
Well, it might, I think the time to talk about that might be when you're talking about the CRA,
yeah, which is down the road, so,
which is down the road, and we've been so hyper-focused, I think,
yeah.
on the subject itself, and rightfully so.
Well, why don't you guys all work on it, and let's let council get through our, deliberation on the legislation that we have on the desk, and then, maybe come back to this committee in March. Whenever you say you're ready, I don't think there's no real time rush, I don't think it.
Okay, no, certainly
Is that
appreciate
fair to
that.
you? Is that fair, Scott, Tim, Chris? Does the committee agree with me? That's just my thought.
Yeah.
Brian?
All right,
You good with
thank you
that?
all for your time and thank you for the
Is that
opportunity.
good? Are you
Appreciate
good
it.
with that?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
all right.
Thank you.
I think I checked all the boxes. Give me that one, Brian, give me that one.
Yeah, when you're done with this one, I wanna go back to the 1261 chapter.
Hold that thought.
I will.
We're going to other. Tim, you may have had something that you wanted to cover.
I wanted to let the committee know that we met with Montrose, last week, and it was a very good meeting. We had a wide variety of things that we discussed. One thing that I thought was particularly interesting was, the concept of support businesses for a large influx of workers. And what they decided was, if we can find some property adjacent, especially to illuminate the corporate park, and talk to those property owners, see if they were willing to talk about developing them in a retail type of situation. I'm thinking restaurants, hotels, I don't know what, but they would then reach out to the brokers that handle commercial and retail, and we could have almost like an event or an open house to bring them in to say, we've got these places where we now think we support, or these places that now are supported by the influx of the workers. I thought that was a very interesting concept. It was development-based, so I wanted to tell you, fresh in my mind.
Isn't that already happening to some degree down at the intersection of Summit and Broad? We're
It
seeing
is.
some retail there, that, I would assume, as that west edge of Pataskla continues to develop and marches towards the, and I know if Mel hears this, she'll shoot me, towards the city center, wherever that might be, if that's here or somewhere else. I think that's definitely a great opportunity for retail and that type of commercial development happening in the right spots.
So, other than that, it was a good revisiting of what they're doing for us, both on the lobbying side and on the development side. So, I just want to let you guys know that happened.
Do you have anything else, Scott, Chris, before I turn Andy loose?
No, sir.
All right, I'm gonna get a drink of water while I watch this.
So I just have one request, because I'm not giving up on the chapter 1261 option yet. So as I look through this, an establishment of a plan district is done through the commission, through a planning study, presented to council, I'm reading, presenting to council for consideration upon recommendation by the commission. I'm assuming commission in this sense means the Planning and Zoning Commission. Don't know exactly what that means, because it doesn't really define it here, but I'm assuming that's what it means. So I also read the 126106 as the process of adoption. It's not saying how, or it's not saying, I'm sorry, it defines how that happens, not necessarily that they have to happen together. It says it has to use the same adoptive procedure, essentially, as 1217. That's the way I read that. It doesn't necessarily that those coincide together. It's just the planning district, this planning district happens, it's adopted similarly or in the same process as 1217. They can happen independent of each other. So what I guess I'm looking at is, not only can we look at the easement, and I'm not saying that that's a bad idea in any way, shape, or form. I'm still saying that the way this is crafted, it actually works to allow us to, an easement is permanent unless we decide to amend it through, actually, I guess if both parties decided to amend it. That's what an easement requires. In this situation, under 1261, a review similar to the comprehensive plan happens, and the city amends it, not the developer. So the city makes changes to it and is allowed to make changes to it. So again, I'm just trying to have the city have more say in how this happens, if this were to happen. I think, I'd like for Scott and Brian just look at it, maybe take another review of it, see if it's possible to not send the zoning back to planning and zoning, but to instead ask planning and zoning to potentially look at 1261 as a planning district and bring it to council, so both of those can be looked at the same time.
But don't you still have to have don't you have to have, planning commission can't take it on its own initiative to create an overlay.
I understand, yes, the applicant,
The
the
applicant
owner of the property
has to-
would have,
Right.
whomever that, at that point.
Right, whoever, right.
Yeah, and the planning area could be, in this situation, I would think we'd want it to be the whole entire area.
Right.
But it could be half of it, it could be a quarter, of it, whatever.
But
In
don't
this
you
situ-
jeopardize, if you're not tracking them at the same time, you could have the underlying base go through and then the 1261 regulation sidetrack, and you never get that done.
You know, that's possible, but in this situation, I don't think that's gonna happen. I think what would happen would be,
I
is
plan
that you
for
have a
what's
planning.
possible, and that's not and you also, well,
So all I'm asking is if we relook at this and see if there is a way, if you could bring back to us both a opinion on 1261 being something that can go through planning commission and then be brought to council at the same time as this planning, as the zoning, rezoning application is looked at by council. Because I do believe that they are independent issues. Because it says, right, it says clearly that when the plan district addresses concerns unique to an area when other zoning mechanisms cannot achieve that desired result. So in essence, they are independent of each other.
I don't know if that's the track you would wanna take, because
Okay. Well, if we could look at, see if there is a avenue to use one, if there is an avenue to use that, I'd appreciate to at least understand that.
Okay.
Thanks.
Anybody have anything else? All right, motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Wolford,
Yes?
Buick,
Yes.
Lee.
Yes.